A letter arrived at Amara's office many months later. There was a picture of Papillo within, the guy who had enslaved her. Behind it was a message that read, "He's back in town and he hasn't changed." Papillo was the same man who bought her from her stepmother, treated her like a slave, and nearly caused her to lose herself before she fled. God sent an angel in human form to assist her. Amara couldn't fathom that he was still alive. Papillo isn't meant to be. He is supposed to be languishing in prison for his crime against her, but he is still threatening to steal the peace from her even after she had come to terms with it and chosen to go on with her life. And it was the same man who plotted with her stepmother to inflict so much agony on her and inflict more suffering on her. The man in the faded photograph had gray patches in his rough beard and a recent scar on his chin, but those hollow, pitiless eyes were unmistakable. Amara looked at the picture for a while, and although her expression remained calm, her hands were shaking a bit. Papillo, the man who stole her youth, turned the picture over again. The note was written quickly in blue ink. He's still in town, running his tire shop and using children as friends. Even though she didn't recognize the handwriting, something in her gut told her it was him. The actual Papillo was back, and she hadn't changed. She put the letter on her desk and stood there with her heart racing. This was no longer about her. It was about the other children, boys and girls, who could be going through what she had gone through. She wouldn't allow that to happen again. Amara sat across from Mr. Joe in their living room later that day. The walls had just been painted, and a small picture of Sophia was now hanging close to the television. Everything was quiet, but she was about to bring up something more profound. "Daddy," she said as she put the picture on the table. Mr. Joe grabbed the picture and immediately turned white. "That's him," she nodded, certain of it. "Where is he?" Mr. Joe asked, his jaw clenched. Same place, same business, same work, apparently. Mr. Joe slammed the image back on the table. "We're reporting him too." "No, not yet. I want to see for myself first," Amara said to the police with conviction. Mr. Joe was frightened and said, "You can't go near that man. He's dangerous. I'm not the scared little girl he dragged away that night. I need to do this, not only for me, but also for the children he's hurting now." Amara's eyes showed the same fire that Sophia had once had. "Then I'm going with you," Mr. Joe said. She smiled and said, "Thank you." Amara, wearing sunglasses and casual attire, strolled alongside Mr. Joe along the busy streets of Abuja. 2 days later, the air behind them was filled with the sounds of the city horn's screams and music from nearby kiosks. But her mind was focused on one sound, the metallic clink of tire irons from a tiny roadside stand. There it was, Papillo's store, unchanged, selling old tires. He was standing there, Papillo, giving instructions to a barefoot boy who was no older than 7 and who was having trouble carrying a tire that was twice his size. "Move faster, lazy boy," Papillo yelled, hitting the youngster on the head. Amara's breast was covered with rusty tools that were piled like towers, and a broken umbrella was flapping over a wooden bench. The memories came back hard as the same voice that used to yell at her and the same anger in his eyes, but she didn't budge. She took a step forward, but Papillo didn't immediately identify her. Rather, his eyes scanned her as though she were just another customer. "You need a tire?" she asked. She tugged as his gaze met hers from behind her glasses. Something flickered, confusion, realization, then fear. "You," he whispered. Amara gave him a hard grin. "Hello, Papillo, still trading children like old rubber." "You're not supposed to be alive," he said, taking a step back. "Well," she replied, crossing her arms, "you made a mistake. We're reporting you for what you did to my daughter, and for what you're still doing," Mr. Joe said, approaching from behind her with his phone in hand to record everything. Papillo noticed a crowd beginning to form and attempted to respond with a bark. "But that youngster is my nephew, and you have no evidence to the contrary." "Auntie, help me," the youngster murmured as he glanced up at Amara. Within hours, the cops came, neighbors stepped out of hiding to share their stories, and other youngsters emerged from hiding. He had changed his name and lived in several places, but the pattern remained the same. Papillo was taken into custody immediately after he was seen abusing and keeping vulnerable children out of school. As he was being pulled away, he yelled, "You are nothing. I gave you a place to stay. You were ungrateful." Amara kneeled next to the youngster and didn't even glance at him. "What's your name?" the boy asked, to which Sami replied. "You're safe now, Sami," she murmured. "You don't have to go back there." That night, with tears streaming down his face, he gave her a big embrace and enrolled Sami in Amara's Foundations program, which included school, food, clothing, and therapy, as someone once did for her back home. Mr. Joe stood in the doorway of Adana's room, watching her brush Sami's hair. "You're becoming a mother," he said with a grin. "I'm becoming a protector," she answered on behalf of every child that was broken like me. "Your mother would be proud." They sat together in silence, watching Sami fall asleep on the couch, but the peace didn't last, since later that week, while Amara was reviewing her Foundation's donations, she got another envelope containing just one picture of her grandmother, Mama Sarah, the woman who had assisted Linda, with no return address. This time, she was in a hospital bed with oxygen tubes attached, and a note indicated that she was dying and wanted to see you. Will Amara confront the woman who betrayed her bloodline, or will she leave her to die in silence and remember the night Amara was sold away? It was the same Mama Sarah who dragged her out of her sleep at the request of her stepmother, and despite her pleadings and screams, she refused to listen and handed her over to her stepmother, who ultimately sold her to Papello Amara. Now, Amara is faced with the difficult choice of whether or not to forgive her help. The air in the hospital room was thick with something heavier history, guilt and pain that extended throughout, rather than the smells of antiseptic or the sound of the oxygen equipment that was connected to the elderly, frail woman in the bed. You could either bring her live again and continue, or you could pay her back for her wickedness. Standing just inside the door in her white coat and stethoscope, dangling loosely around her neck, Amara was not here as a doctor today, but rather as a granddaughter, one who had formerly been sold like livestock across generations. Mama Sarah lay motionless, her skin wrinkled like the old woman's head, which was once proudly covered in vibrant headscarves, was now balding in patches. Tubes ran from her nose, her eyes blinked slowly, and when they finally focused on Amara, they widened in silent shock. "You came," the old woman said, her voice as dry as dust. Amara advanced slowly, keeping her eyes on the woman who had dragged her out of slumber one night and handed her over to a monster. She didn't respond right away, but eventually spoke in a low, strong voice. "I didn't come for you. I came for me." Mama Sarah swallowed hard. "I didn't. Linda told me that she was doing what was best for the family, and I didn't realize what kind of man he was. You dragged a 6-year-old from bed and gave her to a stranger. You watched me cry. You ignored my appeals for my father. You did it for a few thousand naira, and you knew her mission. If you knew her mission, why didn't you help me when I was crying and begging for help? After your mother Sophia passed away, everything changed. Your father only saw you, and he stopped listening to anyone. The old woman whispered to me that Linda had threatened to throw me out if I didn't help her. I was terrified, and the ghost of that woman you helped me eradicate," Amara said. Drawing closer, because I reminded him of love, Mama Sarah turned her face away. "I was mistaken. I believed that if you vanished, peace would return, but there was only silence, punctuated by the oxygen machine's sluggish mechanical hiss. I requested to meet you, but the old woman responded with a trembling voice, telling me that I wanted to die in peace and that I wanted to beg for forgiveness." There was a lengthy, frigid pause between Amara and her before she finally said, "I forgive you." Mama Sarah was taken aback by this. "But not for you," Amara continued. "I declined to let your treachery consume me for the remainder of my life, since it would just poison me." The elderly woman offered a hand, but Amara declined and instead walked to the door, pausing and uttering, "You can die in peace. However, I will live in fortitude, which is something that none of you could ever rob me of." Several weeks after Amara walked out, she didn't come back to the hospital where Mama Sarah had been admitted. When she received the call that Mama Sarah had died that evening, she simply nodded and requested that the burial be held. The hospital should take care of the arrangements. She later told Mr. Joe that evening while they were having tea on the porch, "You're stronger than all of us, Amara," he said, laying his hand over hers. "I've had to be," she replied with a weary smile, with the sadness of a father who wished he could turn back time. He stared at her. "Are you sorry for re-entering our lives?" "No," Amara responded. I needed to heal. But I've come to the conclusion that this isn't just about what happened to me. It's about so many kids like me who don't get rescued, who don't get adopted, who never escape. Mr. Joe nodded, saying, "That's why you, Amara, began the foundation." Amara gazed out at the peaceful evening, where the sky was a mix of orange and purple. But the very next week, when Amara was standing in front of a packed audience, the reporters, cameras, NGO delegates, activists, and government authorities were murmuring to one another. There was a huge banner behind her that said, Amara Foundation. She walked up to the microphone. The space went silent, and she said, "My name is Dr. Amara. My name is Dr. Amara, and I was sold for less than 10,000 naira when I was 6 years old." The room was filled with gasps. Audience, I was handed over to a stranger in the middle of the night who treated me like a slave, beat me, and refused me an education. For years, no one came looking for me because the very people who should have protected me were the ones who threw me away. She paused, allowing the audience to process what she had just said. She pointed around the room and stated that she stood before you today as a survivor, a medical professional, and a protector of children, not as a victim. She also unveiled a new initiative, a free child rescue hotline and mobile units for finding child laborers. The weight of her words sunk in. Scholarships for abused children, rehabilitation centers all over Nigeria. Her voice never faltered. "I'm not here to humiliate those who let me down. Rather, I'm here to create a future where children are no longer subjected to what I went through. Because if one voice can rise from the darkness, imagine what a million voices can accomplish." Weeks after, the room was filled with applause. She was invited to speak on national television. Amara continued to utilize her foundation to assist kids throughout the nation who were in similar situations. Her story made headlines, donations poured in, and young women shared their own tales of betrayal. One evening, she entered her clinic and noticed a familiar face waiting for her. Ruth, Linda's daughter, who had changed since she was younger and was now thinner. Ruth's eyes were filled with remorse as she said, "I heard about what you're doing, and Amara tilted her head and said, "For not turning into her. Just wanted to say thank you. I was infuriated at you and my mother for years for being superior to the way we were reared, but now I realize that you survived something that no youngster should experience, and that you are still here." Ruth gave her a soft nod, indicating that there was still hope, and Ruth embraced her. For the first time, the past seemed like history rather than chains, something behind them rather than dragging them down. One evening, Amara was sitting alone on her porch, with Saimi lying by her side, sound asleep. "I hope you're watching, Mama," she murmured as she gazed at the sky. "I kept your light burning while the wind rustled through the leaves." Papello was ultimately put on trial in Abuja, where he was found guilty based on the overwhelming evidence against him. The judge imposed a life sentence for child trafficking, child labor, and associated crimes in order to discourage others from doing the same. Eventually, Amara fell in love with the man and made the decision to marry him. Their wedding gained national attention when she married Mr. Seth, a software engineer whom she had long admired. 10 months after their wedding, they were fortunate to have the blessings of prominent members of the nation. A year later, when the twin girls Amara had always wished for, Amara, her husband, and her father were standing next to a newly finished building, a rehabilitation facility for children who had been abused and trafficked domestically. The facility, which bore her name, included counselors, books, beds, and hope. The youngsters were playing in the garden. A local news team asked her in classrooms and peaceful spaces, "Dr. Amara, if you could go back in time and talk to your 6-year-old self, what would you say?" She smiled and paused before answering. "I'd tell her, hold on. The world tried to break you, but you were never meant to." If you were in Amara's position, would you have forgiven Mama Sarah, the grandmother who assisted in saving Amara's life? The message persisted in the hearts of the children she saved, and she stayed broken since. One child had endured the unimaginable and made sure that the next child never had. Papello, who purchased Amara and treated her as a slave, was sentenced to life in jail. Do you think this was sufficient punishment for his stepmother's decision to sell her to a stranger? I would like to read your thoughts on this story if you enjoyed it. Please leave a comment, share it, and subscribe to our channel for additional fascinating stories.